The casting couch. The phrase, a couch in the office of someone with the power to cast a film, the couch on which the specific transaction of sex for career advancement occurred. The phrase, a euphemism. The word couch contains the act without naming it. The word casting makes it professional. The combination produces a phrase that everyone understands and that sounds almost innocent, almost like a business arrangement. This is the specific work that language does when it needs to describe something that cannot be named directly. I am going to name it directly. The casting couch. The use of sexual coercion by people with power over employment to obtain sexual acts from people who need employment. Not a choice. Coercion. Not an exchange between equals. The exchange of something one party needs for something the other party has no right to demand. The specific reason it has been called a choice, the woman was not physically forced. She could have refused. The specific thing that makes it not a choice? Refusing meant losing the career. Losing the career? Not a neutral option in a society that has organized women's economic security around their ability to work in their chosen field. The choice between submitting to sexual coercion and losing your livelihood? Not a free choice. It is a choice in the same way that handing over your wallet to a mugger is a choice. I want to describe the structure, because the structure is the mechanism, and the mechanism is what produced the specific individual cases. Hollywood in the 1930s, 1940s, and 1950s. A specific power structure in which the authority to cast films was concentrated in a very small number of men, studio heads, producers, major directors. These men had the power to make careers, to give or deny the roles that transformed an aspiring actress into a working actress, an unknown into a star. The women who wanted careers needed what these men had. The specific leverage? Absolute in some cases, partial in others. Not every casting decision went through a single man. Not every woman who wanted a career was dependent on a single gatekeeper. But enough cases were controlled by enough men that the system existed, was known, and was used. The specific mechanism? A woman was brought to meet a producer, a director, a studio head. The meeting, presented as professional, an audition or a screen test or a conversation about a potential role. The meeting would shift. The professional context would become personal, an invitation. An expectation. Sometimes explicit, sometimes implicit. The specific thing about implicit? Implicit is more powerful than explicit. Explicit can be refused. Implicit cannot be refused because it has not been stated. If you refuse an implicit offer, you have refused something that was never offered. You have simply not gotten the role. The woman who refused the implicit did not get the role. She was not told why. There was nothing to fight. There was nothing to report. There was nothing to prove. The role simply went to someone else. I want to describe, without naming individuals in cases where legal proceedings have not established facts, the general profile of the men who used this system. The studio head. The most powerful position. The casting decision for major films ultimately involved the studio head's approval. The specific use of this power? Meetings that were not simply professional, preferences that shaped which actresses were given the attention of the studio's resources. The producer. The working producer on a specific film had significant influence over casting. The relationship between producer and actress. The specific location where much of the exchange occurred. The director. Significant influence over casting, depending on the director's standing with the studio. Major directors had casting authority. The director-actress relationship. Another location. The talent agent, an intermediary whose power over a woman's access to auditions was significant. The agent who controlled access to the best auditions, another gatekeeper. The men in these positions, not uniform. Not all of them used the system. Some were entirely professional. Some were genuinely committed to casting by ability. The system did not require that all men use it. It required that enough men use it that the women who wanted careers could not be certain which men they were dealing with. The uncertainty, a form of the system's power. I want to describe the specific language that has been used to describe the casting couch, because the language is the mechanism of the concealment. She slept her way to the top. This phrase places the agency entirely with the woman. She slept. She made a decision. She used sexuality as a tool for advancement. The man, absent from the phrase, the man who required the sexuality, not present in the language. She knew what she was getting into. This phrase assumes the woman had full information and made a free choice. She knew. She chose. The specific conditions under which she knew, the power differential, the economic dependency, the specific coercion, not present in the phrase. That's just the way Hollywood works. This phrase normalizes the system. It is not a moral statement. It is a statement about how things are, the way things work, not subject to moral assessment, simply the mechanism. She gave in to get the role. This phrase, gave in, almost sympathetic, almost acknowledging that something was demanded of her. But the passive construction, the role as justification, removes the moral weight from the man who demanded. Each phrase contains the event while removing the coercion, contains the woman while removing the man, contains the transaction while removing the imbalance. This is the specific work that the language has been doing for decades. I want to describe what the experience was like from the inside, as described to me by women who experienced it. The meeting. You were brought in, usually by your agent or by a contact in the industry, to meet someone who had power over your career. You dressed carefully. You were professional. You were prepared. The shift. It was rarely abrupt. It rarely began with a direct proposition. It began with a change in register. The conversation became personal. He asked about your life outside work. He mentioned that he liked you, that he thought you were something special, that there was a role he was thinking about. The implication? Unmistakable once you understood the pattern. Less unmistakable the first time. The specific horror of the first time. You might not recognize what was happening until it had happened, or until you had refused and found out why the refusal was costly. The recognition. The moment when you understood what was being asked was the moment the meeting became a negotiation you had not agreed to enter. The choice at that moment? Narrow. Agree, and you might get the role, and you would have done something you did not choose to do. Refuse, and you would not get the role, and possibly you would be marked as difficult, as not a team player, as someone who did not understand how the industry worked. The marking? Informal. Nothing written down, but effective. The word that went around, and words did go around, that this one was difficult. I have described the system. I want to describe how some women navigated it, because the navigation is the most rarely described element. Some women complied, got the role, and then had to continue to comply, or to find a way out of the compliance without losing what the compliance had gotten them. Some built careers. Some found that the compliance did not end the demand, that each new role required new compliance. Some women refused and found other paths. They worked in theater rather than film. They worked in the less prominent film roles that were not controlled by the most powerful gatekeepers. They built careers more slowly, through ability and persistence, through finding the men in the industry who were not operating the system. Some women refused and left the industry. The specific calculation? The career was not worth the cost. This option, possible only for women who had other options. Women without economic alternatives did not have this option. Some women found protection. They attached themselves to men with power who were not using the system, men who were genuinely in love with them, or who were gay and for whom the specific transaction was not available, or who had principled objections to the system. The attachment? Protection from the other men. Also, its own form of dependency. Some women played the system strategically, understood what was being demanded, managed the demands on their own terms. This required a specific combination of intelligence, nerve, and the particular luck of dealing with men who could be managed rather than men who could not. Marilyn Monroe. I described her in the film series in the Some Like It Hot episode. I described the specific achievement of her performance, the 47 takes, the voice that was hers but wasn't, the intelligence performing innocence. I want to describe something else here. Monroe has described, in various accounts, her experience of the casting couch in the early years of her career, before she was famous, when she was Norma Jean Mortensen, a young woman from Los Angeles with few connections and no money, trying to build a career in an industry that had specific gatekeepers and specific requirements for access. The specific accounts. Describe the system I have described: meetings with producers, the shift in register, the expectation. Monroe complied in some cases. She was explicit about this, in a way that was unusual for the era, and that the city talked about in ways that used the compliance as evidence of her character rather than as evidence of the system's power. The city said she slept her way to the top. The accurate description: she navigated a system that demanded sexual access as the price of a career, and she paid the price. And the city then used the payment as evidence that she was the kind of woman who traded sex for advancement. The system made the demand. The woman met it or didn't. The city judged the woman for meeting it. The men who made the demand, not judged. I have not named the specific men who used the casting couch system. I want to describe why. The men are known. In Hollywood, in 1951, the names of the men who used this system are known. They are talked about. Women warn each other. The specific men? Known. The men are not named publicly for specific reasons. First, legal. The accusation of sexual coercion is a serious accusation. Without documented evidence, which, given the nature of the system, does not exist, the accusation is not provable in a legal proceeding. Publishing the accusation? Libel. Second, power. The men who used this system were among the most powerful people in Hollywood. Accusing them publicly meant entering a fight against people with resources to destroy the accuser. Third, the social framework. In 1951, the dominant social understanding of the casting couch is that it is a woman's choice. An accusation that a man coerced a woman sexually, the woman would be asked what she did to invite the coercion. The accusation would turn against the accuser. The men are not named, because naming them would cost the namer more than it would cost the named. This is the specific power of the system. Not that the names are unknown, that knowing the names produces no consequences. I am an actress. I have been in this industry for 16 years. I want to describe my specific experience, because this is the episode where my specific experience is most relevant. I have not been in the direct situation I have been describing. I have been fortunate in this in ways that I understand were not available to everyone. The specific reasons for my relative protection: I am primarily a theater actress. The theater world has its own problems, and I will not pretend otherwise. But the specific power concentration of the Hollywood system, the specific casting couch mechanism, is less present in the theater world because the power is less concentrated in single individuals. I worked at the beginning of my career with specific directors who were not operating the system. I was fortunate to find these people early. Other women were not fortunate in this. I have enough financial independence, barely at times, that the specific leverage of career dependency was not absolute. Women without this margin did not have the same protection. And I have been angry about this for 16 years. The specific anger? At the system that I have been working in. At the specific normalization of a structure that takes what women have not agreed to give. At the language that describes this normalization as simply how things work. How things work is not a moral category. How things work can be changed. It has not been changed. I am describing it in 1951. I want to describe the role of the talent agent in the casting couch system because it is less often described. The talent agent represented the actress. Theoretically, the agent's job was to find the best opportunities for his client and to negotiate the best terms. The agent had relationships with the producers and directors and studio heads who were the gatekeepers of casting. The specific thing that happened in some cases: the agent was aware of what the gatekeeper expected, was aware of the system, and sometimes facilitated the meeting knowing what the meeting would require. The agent who sent his client to a meeting he knew would result in sexual coercion, not innocent. This is described in the accounts of women who have spoken about their experiences. The agent as pimp, a phrase that is used and that is extreme, and that is also, in specific cases, accurate. The agent who facilitated these meetings was participating in the coercion. He received a percentage of the career that resulted. The percentage? Built on what was demanded of his client. I want to describe the specific fate of women who spoke publicly about the casting couch. They were not believed. Or, they were believed, and it did not matter. The man they accused was more powerful than they were. His denials were more credible than their accusations. His lawyers were better than theirs. His connections were more extensive. The specific case of the woman who accused a powerful man of sexual coercion and was believed, the man's career continued. The woman's career did not. This is documented in various accounts, though rarely in print, because the documentation of these accounts is itself the kind of documentation that produces the legal and professional consequences I described. The specific calculation that women made: is speaking about this worth more than the career? For most women, no. For almost all women in this era, no. The system? Self-sealing. The coercion, invisible because the coerced could not speak about the coercion without destroying what the coercion had been used to protect: the career. I want to describe the specific irony of the relationship between the Hays Code and the casting couch. The Hays Code regulated what could be shown on screen, prohibited the depiction of sexual immorality without punishment, required that women on screen who engaged in sexual activity outside marriage face consequences. The casting couch, the sexual behavior of the men who ran the industry that produced the films that the code regulated. The code protected fictional women from the depiction of sexuality. The casting couch subjected real women to sexual coercion. The code's enforcers, mayor, the studio heads, the producers, were, in some cases, the same men who used the casting couch. The specific irony? The men who required that female characters on screen be punished for sexual transgression were, in their professional practice, requiring real women to sexually transgress as the price of employment. The morality on screen, the coercion off screen. Both, organized by the same men. I want to describe why this episode is the most difficult I have written in this series. The previous episodes, about things that happened, events with documentation, with legal records, with published accounts. This episode, about a system that was not documented because the documentation would have been harmful to everyone involved. A system that was known and not spoken about. A system that I am describing based on what I know from women I trust and from observations I have made over 16 years. The absence of documentation, not evidence that the system didn't exist. The documentation's absence is itself evidence of the system's power. If the system were small and peripheral, it would have been discussed openly and documented and addressed. The system is not discussed openly and documented and addressed because it is large and central, and the people who could document and address it are the people who benefit from it. This is the specific quality of the casting couch as a scandal. It is the least scandalous element of the Hollywood system, in the sense that everyone knows about it. And it is the most scandalous, in the sense that it is the most direct and personal harm that the system produces. I am writing this in 1951. I know, from the device, that what I am describing will continue. The casting couch will not end in 1951. The specific system I have described, the power differential, the gatekeepers, the demand, will continue for decades. It will be described in subsequent decades with the same language I have described. The choice, the exchange, the way things work. The women who experience it will continue, in most cases, to not speak about it publicly. The calculation I described, the career worth more than the speaking, will continue to be made. Some things will change. The legal framework around workplace sexual harassment will eventually develop in ways that provide some protection. The cultural framework will eventually shift. In 1951, none of these changes have happened. I am describing a system that is operating at full intensity and that is treated as normal. The normalization. The most important element. Not the system itself. Systems can be changed. The normalization. What makes the system seem inevitable when it is not. This is the 8th and final Hollywood episode. I want to describe what the 8 episodes together have been saying, because the casting couch episode is the culmination. Episode 1. Arbuckle. The myth that destroyed an innocent man. Episode 2. The Hays Code. The business arrangement dressed as morality. Episode 3. Bergman. The punishment of a woman for living her life. Episode 4. Hughes. The control system applied to women. Episode 5. The Blacklist. The punishment of political belief. Episode 6. Mayor. The factory that made stars and cost them their health and autonomy. Episode 7. Turner. The child who became a supporting character in her mother's story. Episode 8. The casting couch. The systematic sexual coercion of women who needed work. The thread through all 8. The Hollywood system. Magnificent and brutal. Produced extraordinary art and caused specific harm. The harm, directed primarily at women, at the politically vulnerable, at those without power to resist. The specific mechanism? The same in each case. Power used for purposes other than the purposes it claimed to serve. The mythology. The dream factory, the most glamorous place on earth, the making of stars. The reality? What I have described in 8 episodes. Both true. The casting couch is the scandal that has no scandal, because it is not a single event, but a system, and a system that is described as a choice when it is coercion. And coercion that is invisible, because the women who experienced it could not speak about it without destroying what the coercion had been used to protect. And that has been normalized in exactly the way that every abuse of power is normalized, by making the language of the normalization sound like the language of simple description, as if the way things work and the way things should work were the same thing. I have been in this industry for 16 years. I have watched this system. I have been angry about this system for 16 years. I am still angry. The anger, not getting smaller. Come back next week. We leave Hollywood. We go to music. Billie Holiday, the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, Harry Anslinger. The specific story of what a government agency did to a singer because it could, because she was black, because she was inconvenient, because she would not stop singing the song, "Come Back."